All right. So thank you all so much for being here for the second annual planning party, fall planning party, very back to school, kind of back to writing, getting back into the rhythm of things. This year's focus, and I will send out the highlights from last year's planning party, which was a lot about thinking about how much time do you actually have available for you, and planning with that in mind rather than, as I have so often done, making like a huge list of everything I think I might want to work on. And then realizing in like October that I have a job and like, kids and a dog. So I have other things to do. Um, so that was really about planning and thinking about kind of how much time do you actually have, and then how do you make the most of that time, and how do you think about ways to kind of keep yourself on accountable and to stay on track. This year, I really wanted to focus on finishing work, figuring out what it is that you're working on and actually getting it done. This is partially just selfish because I have had like a lot of little projects that I've been working on, and I've found myself kind of like spinning my wheels, like all of these different things that each would take maybe between an hour, 2 hours, 5 hours to finish. So I think about one and then I think about another one and then I make a note and then I think about it some more, and don't actually finish any of them, which is, it also just feels so to always be like working a little bit and thinking a little bit and not really making headway. So if you're in a space kind of similar to that, where you have maybe a lot of projects that you could be working on or a lot of things that you are thinking about, I hope this will be helpful for you in terms of just clarifying what your priorities are. Like, what is the one thing that you were going to work on until it is finished? And then you can pick one more thing. If you're in a place where you have like a big book, which I know some people do, I still think the idea of figuring out what to finish is a really helpful one. And I don't mean like, when are you going to finish your novel? Because that could be a years long project. If you have a big project, I think it's really helpful to figure out like, what is the next part of it that you can finish? Like, what is a thing that within a week or two you could say, like, yes, I have made some progress? Because when you're working on something big, it's so easy to feel like you're just kind of wading through a swamp. Or maybe there are other metaphors for that. So figuring out like, what is your one next thing that you can finish and feel good about and feel excited about and feel like you want to keep going with. So let me go ahead and share my slides. Um, I think I've already covered my kind of like top line ideas. I am having like a very slight little flashback to like teaching online and like the fall of 2020. Um, but I can see you all here. You're not off screen playing video games as my first year students sometimes were in that fall. Um, Okay, so yeah, a couple of thoughts on the idea of planning. I assume that you were all here because you're already like excited about planning as a process. But my pitch, and if anyone else wants to weigh in on this, you're welcome to contribute in the chat, is really that like planning is actually kind of, for me at least, an essential element of creative work. It's not the opposite of it. I think sometimes people feel a little like hamstrung, like, what do you mean planning? I'm a creative person. And my argument is really that making some decisions about what you're working on and what that work needs, and maybe figuring out what's getting in your way, can free up your brain to do the creative work that it is that you really want to be doing. Um, so, all right, the big idea is really about the magic of one thing. And I got this from Jessica Abel, who's a visual artist and a kind of creativity guru that I interviewed a number of years ago when I was writing a different column. And she talks about just like the magic of one thing, picking one thing and working on it until it's done. And that what happens when you're really focused on just one thing at a time is that it's not just about the time that you put into it, right? It might be the case, and I know for lots of people it is, that you only have like 15 minutes, um, a day, or you have maybe have half an hour on a Wednesday afternoon or something you can work on your project. But that if you're just focusing on one thing, it can actually kind of multiply your time because that one thing you're carrying it with you when you're like walking your dog or going to the grocery store or commuting. So it really kind of like accumulates all of that energy. I also think there's just such a sense of momentum in finishing something. So if you pick one thing and you're able to cross it off, it can make you so much more excited about continuing with the next one. So a couple of questions that might help you. The first thing we're going to do today is just to think about what is your next one thing. So if you've got lots of projects, I'm going to suggest, mandate to the extent that I can in this group, I'm going to suggest that you just pick one thing that you're going to finish. And you can go ahead and make your like big long list. Here's my list. I have my list, like big long list of everything you want to do. You can do that first if you want, but pick one thing that you want to finish. I provided a couple of questions to help you think about that question of like what is going to be the next priority. And I'll also share a piece by Amy Sharm that I think is really smart about figuring out your priorities. So you can think if there's a deadline or if it's timely in some other kind of way, if it's going to make you money, if it's going to advance your writing life. You can also just think about what helps you to feel excited. Like, oh, I actually really love this idea and I'd love to be able to share it with people. Sometimes, and this is maybe a little perverse, there's just that thing that you've been working on and you were supposed to have done it and you're maybe kind of late with it, and you have like a little guilt cloud. So maybe you could just finish it and like lift that guilt cloud and make space for other things. You could also just think about what's the thing that you could finish fastest. If there's something that like actually this probably would take me like 20 minutes and I could knock it out and then I would be able to move on to something else. So any number of ways, but if you've got a lot of little projects, a couple of questions to help you think about what you want to finish first. And if you've got one big project, I think it's really helpful to define one next step. And honestly, especially if you're getting back to a project, your first step might be like opening up that document. I think that sometimes is a really big step, especially if you have feedback you're working on. It also might be like printing out the whole thing so you can read it and actually write on it. It might be helpful to figure out like what is your next milestone. It might be a chapter, it might be a particular kind of revision, it might be some research you need to do, but pick out one thing that you can finish. All right, I want to give us some time now, about 10 minutes, to think about your next one thing. You can start by making a big list of all the things you could be working on, or make a list of some next steps for your project. But you're trying to think about something that you think that you could finish in the next like maybe 1 to 2 weeks, something that would give you a little like zing of satisfaction to finish. I am going to stop sharing, but I'll put that question in the chat if you want to see it written down. So let's take about 10 minutes to think about your next one thing. Okay, so without knowing exactly what's happening in all of your houses, I'm assuming for some people, maybe you already had a list going and you were like, boom, I know which one rises right up to the top. And some people maybe are a little more like, I still have a lot of projects, or I still need to open that file and figure out what is in it. So that's totally fine. This may not actually be like figuring out your one next thing, may not actually be a 10-minute project. That might be a project that takes more time. But you've gotten started. And I think of these workshops oftentimes as being like a way of carving out that space for yourself to at least start the process. I think, especially if you're in a place in your writing life where you're either overwhelmed by like how much you're trying to get done, or just trying to get back into it, giving yourself that space to think about what you're doing and to plan it is actually really useful and important. Like, you're not wasting your time if it takes you a week or more to like get back into a rhythm, to think about what it is that you want to do. Like, giving yourself that time um, is really important. I often beat myself up. I have more of a challenge in the summer, like the beginning of the summer, because I'm like, boom, let's go. 80 hours a week of writing. I've got this time. And like, brains don't work that way. So if you are super excited about getting back to your work, also know that like it's okay if it takes a minute or many minutes. So I'd love to know, either in the chat or if you just want to unmute yourself and talk, um, what you're thinking about when you're trying to think about what your next one thing is. And I think it's so different depending on where you are in your writing life and also what kind of project it is that you're working on. So I think this is a space where like sharing some perspectives or some challenges might be really useful. So feel free to unmute yourself, or if you just want to chime in the chat. There's also a little conversation in the chat going about Amy Sharon's great piece about deciding what to prioritize. And one of the things that I love about that piece is that she addresses the kind of like, what if I commit to this project and it doesn't work out, anxiety that I think is oftentimes behind it. And like, oh no, you will have spent a long time working really hard on something, and that's actually not that bad.
I can share something.
Yeah.
The Amy Sharon piece really helped me this morning. I had just a breakthrough in thinking about what I was prioritizing, and I was kind of prioritizing the complete wrong things, and that's why I was getting stuck. And the question she had in there that really um, appealed to me was thinking about like your writing career, like what is building, and it's not even a career choice. It's like what is my vision for who I am as a writer, and what do I like to share, and what am I working on as my cohesive, overall that I'm building. And I think I had been distracted by a couple of calls for things that seemed like they'd be fun to write, but have nothing to do with what I'm trying to build as a writer. So I went back to a review that I'm really interested in writing, and I'll prioritize that.
That's awesome. I think so. It sounds like you were thinking about, yeah, like what project serves like where I want to go as a writer.
Yeah, and giving back to the literary community and talking about a book that is similar to something that I wrote is more important to me in what I'm trying to build as a writer than some fun random call for something on the side that that would be, irrelevant to what I'm working on as a project, kind of.
I have to have that conversation with myself all the time because, yeah, you see those calls and it's like, oh, I could write something for that. And I think sometimes it is a little bit what Amy Sharon is talking about, where it's just like shiny, where you're like, I could do that. And I haven't started working on it yet. So it probably would be perfect. Unlike this thing over here that I've already been working on that I know is like messy and hard. Heather, what did you want to say?
Oh, yeah, I wonder if anyone else is struggling with this because my list, um, there are a bunch of things that I'm not excited about, but that I committed to other people for.
Yeah.
Some of them are book reviews, small, they're all like little projects, but like the piece that's most important to me is my manuscript.
Mm-hmm.
And but I feel the guilt cloud about all these commitments, and I'm wondering how people have worked through. I guess this is similar to what Cynthia Marie was talking about, this like idea of like, oh yeah, I can do that. That'd be fun. I want to contribute to the community, blah, blah, blah. But this clash between commitments to others versus what you want to accomplish for yourself.
Such a good question. I think part of it, and I would love to hear other people's perspectives too. I think part of it when it's like those little things that you've committed to otherwise is it partially, I think, trying to figure out like, can I bracket how much time this is actually gonna take? Because you could, with like a book review, you could spend, 20 hours writing the most beautiful book review. But what if you like sat down and just wrote it out in like an hour? Like, what if you set a timer for an hour and just saw what you had? And I think I had a bunch of stuff at the beginning of the year that was like real guilt cloud stuff. And one of them I part of it is part of it, we'll talk about more about this in a second, but was figuring out where I was stuck. And part of it was that I just had way too many ideas about the book. I was like, oh, but it's also connected to these 10 other things. And that's not the kind of review they wanted. And that wasn't like for the venue what made sense. So it took me talking to someone about what I wanted to say. And as I was talking, I was like, oh, those 3 ideas actually don't even belong in there. Like I'm trying to write 1,000 words. It needs to have 1 idea. And that was really clarifying. I think with the kind of like guilt cloud project, sometimes it's a little bit like, can I just knock this out in a really like constrained amount of time? Or sometimes maybe am I going to decide I'm not going to do it? Jessica Abel has a great thing about thinking about how it would feel to give up on a project. And if you feel like, oh, like if you feel a sense of relief, then maybe that's a sign that there are some things you can let go. And I know it's tricky when you've committed to it for someone else. Um, but there are sometimes things where it makes sense to, I think it's kind of like, am I going to knock it out or am I going to let it go?
Yeah, I think I just need to like Pomodoro method my way through these projects and just be like, okay, I know you don't want to do it. Let's set this timer and let's just knock it out. And then it's when it's done, I'll feel better. And then that frees up so much mental energy.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that energy is a big part of it. And then I think this is part of what's happening in the kind of question, kind of sidebar in the notes is like, then before you commit to something, and I'm not saying this to Heather, but I'm saying this really probably to all of us and to myself, like before you commit to something next time, asking yourself that question, really that Cynthia was saying, right? Does this actually serve where I want to go? Like, am I excited about this project? And am I excited enough about this project to not do the other things that I could be doing? I was going to say also, and I'll share this in the chat. Andrea Bartz, if people know her, she's a great kind of like thriller writer. She's a really fun newsletter. Um, had a great piece recently, and I think it might be locked out, but I can tell you the kind of gist of it. She was talking about John Truby, who has this book called The Art of Storytelling, and he says something. Oh, he talks about the designing principle. So your book needs to have a designing principle. It's partially about structure. But she was talking about having a designing principle for your writing life and kind of like it was almost like you could think of it as being like a mission statement. Like, what is it that you're trying to do as a writer? And I found that actually really like helpful and clarifying. Like, what big picture do I want to be doing rather than like, do I want to write this review? Do I want to write about this book? Do I want to try to write in this venue? Like, what is the big picture of where I'm trying to go? People are talking here too about time. I can see Aaron talking inside with other people about like how much time things take. I am not someone who tracks my time as a writer because it just doesn't work for my brain, but I know some people are. Aaron is. And I think one thing that people who track their writing time, I think, know about themselves is how long it takes to do different kinds of writing. So instead of just saying like, oh, here's a book that I would like to write about, um, they can say like, okay, and that review is going to be X number of hours. Is that accurate, Erin? Do you have that level of like knowledge about yourself?
I do. And it's sometimes helpful and it's sometimes not because it like I have a good idea. Like it takes me 80 to 90 hours to write a draft of a novel. And that's been true for the last 3 novels. And then it takes me like 300 hours to revise, but the last one took 500. And I'm like, well, that pisses me off because that was way more work. But so like now I have to keep adjusting what it means, but it is really helpful for me. But I know like I have friends in my writing group who are like, absolutely not. I'm not tracking. It makes me it just makes them feel almost like they're in a box they don't want to be in.
Yeah, and so do it, don't do it. But I think one thing, especially if it's the kind of writing that is also for someone else, I think it's useful to have a sense of how long, like what you're actually committing to give.
Well, and if you think of it as like almost like a paid job, even though a lot of this community building stuff is not, but you're like, okay, my time is worth how much per hour, and I'm giving this person who I don't know, who like, you might not even like the book, but you committed. Like for me, it's like my friend is the editor of the review section. He's like, please, just like threw it at me. So it's like, okay, I don't know this person I'm reviewing. How much of my time am I dedicating to writing this review for them?
Yeah. And I think sometimes, I mean, sometimes it is really easy to commit to things for other people and much harder to commit to things for ourselves. And I know that's kind of an obvious statement, but it's maybe worth being, reminded of that. I want to talk a little bit, and I have this image I want to share about some of the things that get in our way as we're trying to do our creative work. So I will share. Yeah, here we are. So trying to think about like wherever you are and whatever you're working on, trying to figure out what's getting in the way. It might just be the case that you're like, you had a really busy summer and you didn't like choose to prioritize your writing, or you genuinely didn't have time to sit down and do it. I know for myself, like my summer just kind of ebbed. Like there were weeks that I had like kind of no blocks of time. And then there were like 2 weeks where my kids were at camp and they were totally gone. And that like fluctuating schedule is often really hard for me. It might be the case that an obstacle is just trying to figure out what's next. Like, what am I actually prioritizing? And I think for me, and this is probably true for other people, without a super clear sense of what I'm working on, it's really easy to just like check my email and like see if anyone has like shared anything interesting, and like to really know what's happening on Instagram. So for me, I think it's like having a really clear priority has been recently, at least, where I've been getting stuck. But you might have a more significant kind of a block that is happening either with one of those pieces or with something bigger. I got this image. So this is from Hilly Reddig, who's a kind of like writing and productivity person. And I learned about her through Carrie Bertino. And she talks about thinking about like if you have this feeling of being blocked with a project, trying to reimagine it not as a block, like as a kind of solid thing in front of you that you can't charge through, but as being instead like a snarl. Like maybe it's a knot and there are actually pieces that you can untangle there. And she encourages you to think about like what is actually getting in the way, right? A block can feel so kind of monolithic. But I think it's more helpful to think like, what do I need in order to keep working through it? It might be that there's knowledge, right? Like maybe you are writing in a new genre and you're just like not actually sure how to do that yet. Maybe you have to do some research. Maybe you need to, I don't know, to actually learn something. It might be that you need help. It might be that you need encouragement. I know oftentimes when I'm stuck and I'm trying to get better about doing this sooner, that it helps me to just talk to someone about what it is that I'm working on. And I don't like doing that because I want to share it once it's good. But it is more helpful to share it when it's messy. And maybe you just need time, right? Maybe you just need to give yourself like 2 hours to knock out that review or whatever it is. So what I want to give us some time to do now is to think about for your next thing, what do you need in order to get it done? And I think especially about who can help you. I would bet that there are people in your life who want to help you with your writing, whether it's a specific writing group who is like, I would love to read that thing that you are working on, or even people who are like, you know what, actually, like I could take your kids for like an afternoon. So you could sit and get your writing done, right? And maybe you have to ask. That can be hard. Um, but to get some of that help. And so again, some of the kind of some of what you might need might be writing related. Maybe you need feedback on an actual piece of writing, or you need advice or something like that. But it also might just be life stuff that you need help with. Or you can help yourself. You could think about choosing not to do some things. Your kids will not perish if they eat macaroni and cheese again for dinner. Um, or taking shortcuts, or just doing some things at a lower intensity. So let's spend a couple of minutes now thinking about, for your next thing, what do you need in order to get it done? So you probably haven't solved all of your problems in those couple of minutes. But I'd love to know any thoughts that you had about trying to figure out where you're stuck, if you're stuck. There's some great comments in the chat. I particularly love the Oliver Berkman deciding what you're going to suck at for a while. I think that's a good reminder that you don't have to do everything at 100%. Sometimes I think we're stuck with time. I think that the like making time to do our writing can be so hard, especially if it's the work that you are doing. You haven't promised it to someone else, you've promised it to yourself. Especially if it's hard and it's mucky, it's really hard to prioritize that. I don't know. And some part we'll talk about accountability strategies in just a second. But some part of it, I think, is also just deciding for yourself that the work that you're doing matters, and it does. There's a I feel like I have read maybe like every kind of productivity bro book, although I'm generally skeptical of them. But one thing that I do like, that I've thought about a lot, Charles Duhigg has a thing. Oh, I'm gonna forget which book, but I can look it up and try to remind myself. But he talks about the importance of not just knowing what your goal is, but also why it matters. And I think sometimes, especially if it's a project for you, that maybe you're not sure if it's like, will it ever see the light of day? Who knows? Like, does anyone care? Yeah, exactly. And then there's a lot happening in the chat related to this. The writing for yourself, why it matters, can be a kind of helpful reframing, and maybe like actually writing it and like posting it somewhere so that you can see it as you're working. I'm just taking a look at the chat.
I'm thinking about how the way that I've had like just some rough years, I feel like, of not feeling great about myself as a writer for various reasons. And thinking about the way that that impacts how I end up showing up. And so then it becomes sort of the cycle of like, well, I don't feel like I'm writing as much as I want to, or things aren't getting published as quickly as I want them to. And then I sort of withdraw and start to feel like, well, maybe I shouldn't submit there. Or maybe I shouldn't sign up for this reading or whatever. And so trying to like think about the way that that blocks me and try to kind of reorient my own thinking about myself and how I show up.
Yeah. I see so many people nodding in recognition with that feeling. If anyone has thoughts on that, how you've
So I just read a book. I had an advanced copy of it. I think it comes out in November. It's by Tiffany Yates Martin. It's called The Intuitive Author. She wrote The Intuitive Editor, which was really or Intuitive Editing, which was really good. but it's the first book I've read about writing that's not about craft and it's not about the business side, but it's really about the mind fuck that is being a writer and like how you navigate figuring out what it is that you want out of your career versus what you're told to want. What does success look like to you versus what you're told it's supposed to? It was really, really changing. Yeah. So it's coming out again in a month or two, but I really enjoyed that book. It made me feel better about myself, which is not often how I feel at the end of a book about writing.
Thank you for that, Erin. And I put at least one link to that in the chat if people want to check that out. That sounds like a really useful resource.
I would say too, for a time suck slog of novels is so like mentally challenging to me. And we talked about the book Refused to Be Done. And I feel like that was the most helpful thing for me personally. Because I've read like so many craft books where they tell you like this is how you do a plot, and I get it, but I have a hard time like thinking of novels in that way. And he has a section where he says, even if you're writing what your book's not, now you're figuring out what your book isn't, and you can start. So it feels like those 17 drafts that I've done that are like 1,000 pages were not a total waste of time.
I think especially like kind of no matter where you are in your writing life, I think it makes such a difference to know that there are other people who care, not even necessarily about the finished product, right? That you've like, and this is maybe where and this is, I think, maybe workshop pedagogy, like that it took me a while to untangle this from my brain because like in a kind of conventional workshop, um, it can feel like you're a valuable member because you're sharing a good poem or story or whatever. But I mean, people who care about your writing is in like they care that you are writing. I think that's so important. And I think if you, especially when you're busy with life, otherwise, it's really easy to not have that space. So if there are ways to make that for yourself, I think that's really important and to prioritize that. I want to talk a little bit kind of like before we get to our last little closing thing about the idea of accountability. And when I'm thinking about accountability, I feel like that can be it can be like a club kind of a word, like you beat yourself over the head with accountability, or you ask someone to like check up on you. And that's not what I mean at all. What I mean is like who will care that you are doing your writing, right? And how will you celebrate for yourself that you are doing your writing? Last fall, I talked about the really silly but very effective strategy I was using as I was finishing the draft of my next book, which is The Arcs Are Behind Me. That's ineffective, but it's up there. I know, I'm thrilled. I'm not a time tracker, but I had little stickers, little heart stickers that I was putting in my planner to like mark my writing days. Honestly, it made me so happy because I was like, hey, look, that was a 3-star day, or like, oh, that was only a 1-star day. That was rough, but I did it. Like, look at that streak of stars, and I can of hearts. What I have been doing recently with my like kind of finishing it things. One is just crossing things off of my list so that I can see that. But I realized that I also had these other stickers. You can't see these, but they're like little you did it stickers, or wow, or they're like little trophies or things. I don't know why I bought them, but I have them, and I was like saving them maybe for something really big, and I was like, Nancy, you're a grown up, you can use your stickers whenever you want. So I've been putting my stickers in for like everything. Did I send something off to someone whose newsletter I'm going to have a little guest post in? It was a paragraph. I put a sticker in my planner for that. I just had an essay today in the isolation journals, which I was so excited about. Elizabeth Gilbert introduced it. And I got an email on Tuesday saying that was going to be in. And I was like, do I put the sticker in for Tuesday? Because I got the good news. Or do I put the sticker in for Sunday? I put the sticker on both days because you can give yourself exactly, right? Like, yeah. So my real point there is just to think about like, what are the things that you can do to celebrate your work? I love stickers. You could also have like a friend that you text when you have done your pages for the day. You could have like your chart where you log your writing minutes. What else are people doing? How do you celebrate? How do you give yourself that sense of like, I did it? If you don't have an answer, stickers are a great answer.
Celebrating is hard, especially when you're an externally motivated person. And you're just like, I'm an adult, stickers. And you're like, but I love stickers. And I also want someone to give me a gold star every time I do something. Celebrating is so challenging for me.
I think sometimes it feels like it has to, or at least for me, it feels like it has to be like a big thing. Like, do I deserve? But we do, like, absolutely.
I was going to
Yeah,
say,
and if you're like, I don't know how to celebrate, I think you probably should start in some way. Erin, were you? I feel like you just unmuted. No.
oh, I was going to say,
I was going to say, oh, go ahead, Amy.
oh, thanks, fellow writers. I'm an interior designer, so just so you know, I track my time too. I'm hourly, or sometimes it's flat fee, but it's based on hours. So I totally get that, and I get the, oh my God, I'm not a designer. I'm so not when I'm doing the work, and always having 2 or 3 choices for people to be safe instead of just putting the first thing out there. Like you were saying, you're like writing a couple of different drafts or getting off course. But lately what I've been doing is writing at the end of the day, everything I have done instead of these really long lists. Or I'll just write 2 things down for the whole week that I have to do, because everything takes more than one hit, no matter what you're tracking down or doing. So, but I like the sticker idea. But mostly I've been like, I've been trying to congratulate myself. Like, I can't believe I just did that. And I move through all the negative talk. You just do it again. And, calling someone is helpful too.
Melissa in the chat just called that a tada list instead of a to-do list, which I think is amazing. The other thing I've been thinking about, and this was the writer Kelly Masters told me this the other day, that instead of, or maybe before doing a to-do list, also writing a done list, to give yourself credit for those things. And I've been thinking, like, in my own life, like I make a to-do list each week and I cross things off, and then like once something is done, it becomes invisible. So I've been trying to think about where I can keep kind of both lists visible for myself, because I think it's always so much easier to remember what we haven't done yet than to think about what we have, and to always feel like a little crummy, because there's always more on that to-do list. Yeah, these are great suggestions over here if you still haven't been. All right, we are almost at time. So I'm gonna ask, if you want, you don't have to, I can't make you. But I'm gonna ask you if you'd like to share in the chat your one next thing. And this is something that you can finish in the next like 1 to 2 weeks. So it's not your whole novel unless you're really, really close to the end. But it might be like a particular layer of revision, or, the next chapter or the next scene. Yeah, or just starting. I think giving yourself a credit for saying, like, this is what I am going to start. Ooh. think that about writing, Erin just said writing 500 words about the next project. I think sometimes that about writing can be harder.
My problem right now is I don't know what my next project is, and I'm a dog once I get the project, but this for me is the hardest part, and I'm trying to figure it out. And I'm like, okay, that was so helpful for me to be like 500 words about it, because
Yeah.
I've really been struggling with what's the next thing.
Yeah.
So thank you.
And that part is just so like muddy, I think. Like once you, yeah, like, what am I doing? Ooh. So we have another like minute or two, but just as an offer to you all. So I will, in let's say 2 weeks, do a thread in my newsletter where people can share what it is that you have done. So I will check back in 2 weeks, and you can share what you have done or what you like, the progress that you made towards your done thing. If you would like a little more like personalized layer of accountability or celebration, you are welcome to email me. So you can just reply to the newsletter. Or if you don't have my email, it's nancy.o.ready@gmail.com. You are welcome to email me and I will send you back a postcard if you don't have one yet, or you can just get more if you want more, and a little note, because it's such hard work and it's nice to be able to like share with someone that you are doing your work, and I would love to know what you are getting done if you want to email me. All right, I hope that folks are feeling like excited and inspired and ready to get down to work this fall, or to like think for a while about what it is that you're working on, maybe a minute. But in 2 weeks, I'll check back in and you can tell me what it is that you have done, and I will think about what I will have done in 2 weeks. All right. So lovely to see you all. Thank you for spending part of your Sunday here together, and I will hope to hear from you all soon.